What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 11 Cash Game Review. I am Ben Harvard. Today I am going to be going over the process that led to another strong week of cash games on DraftKings, the decision points, and the reasoning behind what led to a winning week. 191.6% of head-to-heads, cashed in 10 out of 10 double-ups, and put up a grand total of 155.58 points. If you like this type of content, follow me on Twitter at Ben Harvard. You can see the spelling in the bottom right hand corner. Subscribe on YouTube, and make sure you check back every Thursday afternoon where I'll go over my cash game player pool, in video format. Consider every cash viable play, and talk through that. Hopefully we can land on some of the same plays and continue to win. But let's get right into it. This is the lineup I ended up running. I'll put that up on the screen. And I'll start off with Lamar Jackson, because I think that whether you paid up or paid down at quarterback was really going to shape the rest of your roster and some of the other choices you would end up making on the slate. And, Lamar Jackson came in higher owned than I was expecting him to in cash games. And truthfully, the only reason that it was a shock to me is because I underrated how sharp the field was going to be with this call. It was obvious, that Lamar Jackson was one of the best pure plays on the slate regardless of position, even at 7,700, and the negative stigma of paying up for a quarterback at that price tag. When you separate yourself from the constraints of having a set strategy, I think it was pretty obvious what the right call was. You could be one of those people like, I'm not going to pay over 7K for a quarterback in cash games. Well, just because that has been the working strategy in the past, in seasons past, even in weeks past, even I'm sure in weeks future, that'll be the right call. You need to look at every individual slate as its own beast, and it is, and its own season even. And that's kind of the way that you have to look at Lamar Jackson, I think. And we're talking about, for 7.7K, filling one of your 9 positions on the DraftKings roster with a standard point expectation of about 26 points or more. We're paying over 10K week after week for a similar projection out of Christian McCaffrey. So why wouldn't we pay 7.7K, to lock that in at your quarterback position? And I get that people are programmed in a salary cap format of fantasy football to overvalue value. And what I mean by that is that, okay, there's a lot of value in potentially paying down, say, 5.3K for somebody like Kyle Allen if they have a monster output. But what's the value of safety, right? That's what people don't consider. What's the value of guaranteeing these points in, say, 90% of outcomes? And I think that that is what people overlook, and why they try to pay down from people like Christian McCaffrey and pay down from people like Lamar Jackson. But that, to me, is a clear mistake, and just overlooking the value of security in your lineup, which is why I'm willing to pay those premiums for players who are transcendent, and players who are doing things that we've never seen, or at least comparable to all-time greats. And that's exactly what we're seeing out of both Lamar Jackson and Christian McCaffrey, which is why they're easy plays week after week in cash games. And continuing on that point, Lamar Jackson is not even seeing a full game. He's put up 33.4 points without 4 quarters in back-to-back weeks. He's got Robert Griffin III on his team. They should call him Lamar Jackson III, because it's only a guarantee that he's going to play into the third quarter. He could have easily put up 40 points yesterday if Deshaun Watson put any pressure on Baltimore to play this game hard in the fourth quarter. But the Texans just couldn't do it. And again, Lamar Jackson got sat towards the end, 14 yards shy of his rushing bonus. So we still aren't seeing Lamar Jackson's true ceiling. Back-to-back weeks, he's getting pulled in the fourth quarter. And then, I touched on Christian McCaffrey a little bit. Only 44% owned in cash. Again, both of these plays are being rostered by half the field because they're so desperate to find value, or think that there's very comparable options. And really there's not. There's just not. Nobody is as safe as these guys. We're talking about Christian McCaffrey twice in the last 4 weeks, putting up, over 30 points and terrible offensive outputs by his team. It was a little bit more of an expected outcome against the 49ers in week 8, but it happened again in what's, clearly an improving defense for the Falcons in week 11. But, with Christian McCaffrey, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how bad Kyle Allen is, how bad the rest of the Panthers offense is. He's going to put up, between 29 and 33 points on average, maybe a little bit more. And, that's why he's worth 10.5K on DraftKings, and I'll continue to pay that price. If he doesn't rise anymore, and maybe even if he does, I guess we will see. I have not yet looked at the Week 12 pricing. I guess we'll get to that. So, moving on with this lineup, I'll talk about the two Falcons here. I rostered Brian Hill, who is massive chalk, 64.2%, and then I also rostered Russell Gage, 19.6%. And, even on a week where I won over 90% of my head-to-heads, I still feel like I ran bad because both of these players had touchdowns called back. Brian Hill had a touchdown called back. I think it was in the third quarter. And, he had a pretty horrible game. Obviously, he had 15 rush attempts, 3 targets, only turned that into 30 yards on the ground, 8 yards receiving. Honestly, 3 targets was higher than I would have expected for him, so it was good to see that. But, he got sniped at the goal line by Quadre Allison, and then he had a touchdown called back. It didn't really burn you too bad because it's 64.2% owned in cash. Games, mostly everybody had him, so, we all felt that burn equally. And then comparably, Miles Sanders also ran pretty bad. Sanders played 85% of snaps, ran over 40 routes, but got completely bottled up. In the game against the Patriots, only touched the ball 13 times despite, being on the field pretty consistently. So, I think that was the clear option. I mean, I was never going to really consider playing both of them. I know some people did, which is why the cash line was low this week. I mean, it was what, 136.2 in a $25 massive double up. So, that's obviously a low cash line. And I think that that's probably because a significant amount of people did play both Sanders and Hill in cash. For me, that was never really in play. It was always going to be Christian McCaffrey, Josh Jacobs, and then one of the two. I ended up going with Hill because I thought that, even with Miles Sanders having a better, target projection and receiving role, I thought that Brian Hill had a much higher chance to score touchdowns against this run funnel defense. It turns out he was really close, but like I've said like 5 times now, it got called back. And, moving on to receiver here, Russell Gage, same thing, finished with 2 for 32, which, didn't kill you at his price tag, 3.3K, which is the correct way to find value in your lineup. Going back to what I was talking about earlier, if you can find value with a decent projection at wide receiver 3, that is absolutely the way to roll in cash games on DraftKings. And, Russell Gage almost crushed that expectation, had a touchdown. I was ready to fire off my tweets about how I couldn't gauge my excitement about Russell Gage scoring, but it just didn't happen. I got called back. He couldn't maintain control of the ball or something. It went to commercial and I switched games and I was like, all right, there we go. Got that Gage touchdown. And then I noticed my DraftKings score fall dramatically. Damn shame. But, even so, Russell Gage, I think, was a fine play despite the outcome. And it's tough. If I had lost this week, I definitely would have been a lot more salty about Brian Hill and Russell Gage, both having touchdowns taken off the board. That's a 12-point swing in total. Atlanta put up 29 points, and neither of these guys really contributed to the effort. It was clearly a Calvin Ridley game, but, even so, we got there, so I'm not going to sweat it too badly. Hopefully it didn't destroy anybody else's day. Brian Hill affected us all, but Russell Gage, if you were one of those 20% of people, I think he was a good play. It just, sucks that it didn't work out and that touchdown got called back because it was so close. And in that same game, DJ Moore was chalky as hell, 57.7% owned. And again, just shy of that bonus. So, I mean, I don't know if it's running bad because, he had a good game, no doubt about it. 8 receptions, 95 yards. And like Christian McCaffrey was on just, completely held down by Kyle Allen's inefficiency and how bad Kyle Allen is. Allen is one of the worst 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. I think we can clearly say that. Panthers would be nuts to try and move on from Cam this season, especially if it's in favor of somebody like Kyle Allen. Clearly, he is holding the offense back, but McCaffrey, uber talented, and, I think that DJ Moore is as well. He's going to develop into a really great wide receiver, as he is already showing that he has the potential to be. And just shy of the bonus, still put up 17.5 points on DK, paid off that 5.9K salary, and continues to have a stellar role in this offense. And, I don't really need to go over why we played him. He was clearly a better cash play than guys like Terry McLaurin or Marquise Brown, who I think had some decent popularity, especially McLaurin. But for that same price tag, DJ Moore at 5.9K, 300 more than those two guys, it was pretty obvious with his target share that we had to go there in the matchup as well. And then looking at Deebo Samuel, this was a decision point, no doubt, for a lot of people. He was 45.2% owned. I think had Emmanuel Sanders sat, he would have been closer to 70 or even 80% owned. I talked about it on my podcast, the DFS Dose, which comes out every Friday morning. I was expecting Deebo Samuel to be one of the chalkiest plays we've seen this season. Had Emmanuel Sanders been ruled out, because he was just such a clear value. He had been mispriced, because he had his monster game on Monday Night Football, and then he was coming into just a stellar matchup at such a low price, and then Sanders was hurt. And, I think that people got off of him. He was under 50% owned. I definitely was not expecting that. And at under 50% owned, it was clearly a reaction to Emmanuel Sanders being active. However, Emmanuel Sanders is a 32-year-old wide receiver who just got traded a few weeks ago and was dealing with a hip injury. I did not really think that, him being there one way or the other was really going to affect, Deebo Samuel, who is a rookie stud, honestly. And, he showed that 24.4 points on DraftKings at a 4K salary, 8 receptions for 134, hit the bonus. And, it looked like he was going to miss the end of this game. He was just shy of the 100-yard bonus, got hurt, little shoulder injury, and then, he came through and gutted it out to get us that bonus. Shout out to him, and shout out to the 49ers for the end of that game, and just, Cliff Kingsbury embarrassing. Oh man, I mean, it was just a tough end to that Arizona game. But, if you play Deebo, hopefully you play Deebo. Hopefully Emmanuel Sanders didn't really get you off of him, because I didn't really see the correlation in terms of whether or not Deebo Samuel was a monster play, and again had, a clear lead role in this 49ers, passing attack. And then Josh Jacobs, I mentioned, I was always going to play Josh Jacobs. I think that he had a relatively lower, output in terms of his range of outcomes. He was 65.7% owned in cash. So, everybody was on this play, similar to Brian Hill. We all went down, up or down with the results on this one. And, he had 3 receptions, which is good for him, 112 rushing yards. So, again, got that bonus. He did lose a fumble, which hurt. But, at 6.9 in this matchup, honestly, it was looking a little dicey for a second. Like, oh, man, could the Raiders actually fall? Could this be a trap game? But, the Bengals and Finley are just too bad and dysfunctional at this time, spiraling towards 0-16, it looks like. And, Josh Jacobs capitalized on his opportunities. I think he touched the ball 26 times, if I'm not mistaken. So, again, he's just consistently the focal point of this team. I correlated it with a Raiders defense play. Now, I'm not like super sharp for fading the Vikings. I thought that they were the clear best play on the board. A lot of people went to Cardinals, which I thought was pretty questionable. I get that, Chandler Jones and the pass attack there, 1,500, all those things. But, I really like this range of, Saints at 2.9, Raiders 3.3, Vikings 3.4 was my clear favorite, but I just couldn't get there. And I talked about it on my Thursday cash pool video, that we just had to let it fit this week. There were too many good and comparable options that, just let it roll. There's so many inexperienced quarterbacks on this slate, from Brandon Allen to Ryan Finley to Dwayne Haskins. That was another one. Just so many that were probably going to be turnover prone as well. So, just let whatever fit into your lineup. And I had 3.3K left, all considered. So I just slid the Raiders in, 5 sacks, an interception, a return. It worked out, 13 points. We'll take that out of a defense for 3.3 any day of the week. And Josh Jacobs, another decent showing with 17.4 points. The last decision I made, the one decision I made that really I feel like was a regret of mine, as much as you can regret a week where you win 91% of your head-to-heads, was playing Eric Ebron. I just got talked into this, listening to other people, And usually I always just make my plays, but, I thought the reasoning behind playing Eric Ebron was solid, all the air yards, the 12 targets a week ago, but just to assume that that was going to be his role every week after talking to Frank Reich, it was just pretty ridiculous, honestly. And, I was on Ryan Griffin, which is what really bums me out is like, he was under 5% owned in cash games, and I could have been one of those super sharp people who played him. I was on him all week, talked about him in my cash pool video. He was one of 3 guys that I was considering at that point in the week. Ebron was not on that list, and then I got, just sort of sucked into it late in the week, and then pivoted off of Griffin, who I was really feeling, and then alternatively, Dwelly I thought was a great play as well, and I just went with the stone worst option of the 3, the most expensive option of the 3, and the least productive, only 4 receptions on 4 targets for 27 yards, So that was disappointing. I should have just listened to myself, but, all in all, it was a great week. I had a little bit of Griffin in tournaments, which was nice towards the end there, but yeah, that's really all I've got this week. I think it was a pretty standard week. Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Josh Jacobs and Deebo Samuel were the obvious core, and then it was between Hill and Sanders, Russell Gage, and then maybe getting up to Kenny Stills was something I was considering, but just really couldn't make it work without sacrificing in some other spots. So I think that the core was pretty easy to play this week, and then finding the ancillary options worked out. So, hopefully we can keep this streak going, 3 straight really high output weeks. So we're going to keep that going and then get into it, next week all over again. So make sure you check back on Thursday. Follow me on Twitter at Ben Hauver, BenHauver. Subscribe on YouTube, and thank you for watching. I hope you guys had as good of a week as I did, and I will see you next week.